I was so scared. I didn't know what to expect.
Hey everyone, welcome back. It is season 6 of the BPD Bunch. I'm your host, Xannie, and today I am here with Hak Ja, Jay, and Mo. Where in the world is everyone coming from today?
I'm coming from New Jersey in the U.S.
I'm coming from Calgary in Canada.
I'm coming from Central Ohio in the U.S.
And I'm coming from New Mexico in the U.S. Today, we are going to be talking about BPD in the psych ward. If this or other BPD-related topics interest you, please make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications so you do not miss anything. So when you hear the term psych ward, different images may come to mind. So just to clarify what we mean for the purposes of this episode, we're including everything from short-term crisis interventions to long-term stays in lockdown facilities and everything in between. A bit of a content warning before we get into it. Being in the psych ward is often a result of suicidal ideation or attempts. While we will not go into graphic detail, we are going to touch on these topics, including people who took their own lives. This is a sensitive subject, so if at any point you feel like it's too much, it's totally okay to take a step back. So to start us off, tell us the story of being admitted.
I was doing my master's degree, and it happened around Valentine's Day after like maybe 6 months of ongoing crises, ending up seeing doctors almost weekly in psychiatric ER units. And I overdosed and took myself to the hospital, actually. I was kind of scared. I already started like feeling some changes in my body and pain, etc. And I got freaked out. And I took myself to a general hospital. And the doctors did an assessment. I remember when they read that I had BPD on my record, I found them to be quite abrupt and curt with me, which they weren't before, which felt to me possibly a little stigmatizing, but I don't know if they were just trying to get to the point and be direct. I really don't know. But either way, they did an assessment and they Form 1 with me, which in Canada means like keep you in against your will. So I'm not allowed to leave until a doctor signs me out. The only thing that I do remember feeling is like kind of a sense of like confusion. I almost didn't really understand why I did it when like immediately after I was sort of like, no. You know, even to me, like internally, that was confusing. It's because I still wanted to not be there, but then did at the same time. It's kind of very confusing. I think that that's just how it manifested, but probably what was going on was more so that I just didn't want to keep feeling this way. It's not that I didn't want to be there. I think it was honestly just too much of an overwhelming experience for me to really have any clear-cut reactions. It was so much to process. There were points where I felt like I was being treated badly, but I wasn't really in a position to feel particularly strongly about that. I was so overwhelmed and drowned out by my own thoughts and at various points going in and out of consciousness. So I really don't remember it an awful lot.
I got admitted to partial care, and that was in 2020. I was in my senior year of college. At the very beginning of the year, I found out that the person I was dating at the time had cheated on me. It was the first time anyone had cheated on me, so I was like really distraught. I started like partying a lot. If you would like go into my apartment at school, like my dorm apartment, and you would open my fridge, you would always see bottles. And suddenly like the pandemic is starting. So I couldn't live at school anymore, so I had to move back home. I think just that beginning of that semester, I had already cut off maybe like 20 to 30 people in my life. Classic BPD things that I didn't really realize at the time. And So I was just like kind of slowly getting more and more isolated, which I guess exacerbated like my symptoms. And I just was like slowly getting worse to the point where I did have a psychiatrist, and I told her I'm worried about like my safety. I feel like it's getting really bad again, and like I don't want to self-harm. My urge was like just getting worse and worse. So she was like, okay, well, there's this thing called partial inpatient, and you don't have to necessarily like stay overnight. You can come in every day. It'll be like school. You'll do groups. You'll have like a one-on-one with a therapist and still do like med management. So it was like a relief to me. I would be there for about 4 or 5 hours a day. So not as long as school, but that kind of same format. Like I'm going in, I'm working on stuff, I'm learning things. Like groups were not just like therapeutic in nature, but also like educational. But yeah, I felt like it was like a big relief. And well, that's how I found out I had BPD, through that admission. And I was there for about like 4 months.
So for me, I was in the Navy. This was about 20 years ago. So I was in my early 20s. When I joined the Navy, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I had so much unprocessed trauma to deal with, on top of dealing with bad boyfriends and bad girlfriends. And I felt broken and alone, and I felt like no one understood my pain, and I thought that joining the Navy would help me feel less alone, and I could be proud of myself. And I had graduated boot camp, and I felt confused and angry and very isolated because I was far away from my home state. And I was the weirdo because I didn't really talk to anybody. And so I did a lot of drinking, and lots of self-harm. And I wanted help. I just didn't know how to, I didn't know how to say that. So I guess I just sort of hoped that somebody would notice and ask me if I needed help. And so I started seeing a therapist and stuff. And I remember I was already at the hospital because that's where the therapist, that's where their office was. And he asked me if I should go into inpatient care. And I remember feeling so embarrassed and ashamed because I knew the answer was yes, because I needed help and I was desperate. But I didn't want to admit that I was that bad off. But I said yes because I knew I wasn't going to get better. And I didn't know how to deal with anything. So I said yes, and I admitted myself into inpatient care. I don't know. It was such a weird time in my life because I was so scared. I didn't know what to expect. And I also felt a sense of relief too. So it's weird to feel anxiety about something, but also feel hopeful and feel that relief, It was an interesting mix of emotions.
So I've been admitted to the psych ward multiple times. And before the most significant time, it was always crisis intervention. So it was actually a crisis intervention short stint that led me to ending up in a lockdown facility. And basically what happened leading up to that was that I was in an off period with my favorite person, and they had said they didn't love me anymore. And I was like, well, then life is not worth living. And so I attempted to end my own life. And while I was in the process of that, I had this thought that, oh my gosh, I just got this kitten. I can't leave the world because then she'll be all alone. But I didn't have the guts to reach out to anyone directly for help. So what I did was I called the police and told them that somebody else was trying to end their life at the time, ex's location, praying that they would know that it was about me and come to rescue me. I'm very fortunate. That's exactly what happened. I don't really remember too many of the details. My memory kind of goes from that phone call to all of a sudden running around outside my apartment half clothed with the police chasing me because I didn't want to have to pay the bill that the ambulance would cost. And then I'm in the hospital. That's the next part that I remember. And I was able to get out of staying there for too long. But when I went home, my parents and I had a conversation about my stability, and it was really clear that I was not safe to be around myself. And so my parents called lots of places in the country. I had my BPD diagnosis at this point, and it was hard to find anyone who was willing to take me. But thankfully, the Menninger Hospital in Houston, Texas was willing to take BPD patients. And so I was living in New York at the time. I flew across the country, and it was a lockdown facility, so I wasn't allowed to leave. I wish that I could say more about my initial reaction to being there, but I was so depressed over my relationship ending that they really could do anything, and I wouldn't have had an emotional reaction. I was just so dead and numb to anything. So I did send myself there. It wasn't involuntary or anything, but I think I said yes because my parents were like, this seems like this would be something that will keep you alive and we don't know what else to do. And I was like, all right, sure. So what aspects of the environment were helpful or unhelpful in managing your BPD symptoms?
I think for me, the most helpful thing was not being judged because, again, I had obvious self-harm marks on me, so people weren't looking at me like, oh, what is wrong with you, and just being able to talk to any staff member. I remember there was always some type of professional around to talk to you about what was going on with you. So that was really nice.
Something that I found particularly unhelpful is that as a Canadian hospital, like General Public Hospital, was quite busy. And so what that meant is that the level of attention that I could get from professionals was pretty limited. And although when I did get seen, I will say that the professionals that did see me were pretty tactful, gentle, quite validating for the most part. There were instances where doctors were very abrupt, or if I would ring the bell to get the attendance of a nurse because I was in pain, they would ignore me as if I was dramatizing the situation until I started throwing up. And then they would come and address what I was trying to call them for beforehand. I wasn't making it up. And I don't know why, but I found it's obviously a trashy experience, but it's also just hugely dysregulating to that I'm in that state, and even then don't seem to be taken seriously by people that otherwise know virtually nothing about me. So I found that quite hard to deal with. I was moved from the general ward to a more secure space specifically for psychiatric patients. And I think something that I found really hard there is I couldn't shower for 3 or 4 days because there's nobody to take me there. And there's just a risk with everything. They perceive a risk with absolutely everything. And I never lashed out about that or anything, but I did find it difficult. Feeling physically dirty and heavy makes me feel worse. Showering is kind of important to me even when I'm really low. And so I found that really hard to deal with. Did feel quite isolating. Felt like it was a lot of waiting.
When I was in partial, the biggest thing is that you have a sense of autonomy because you're choosing to go. I don't think people were penalized for not coming in, but I think there was a limit of how many times you could do that before you were cut out of the program, or I guess sent to a higher level of care. And, Although I do really like group settings for like many reasons, the bad thing about it, I guess, is that it's not really helpful if the people in the group are people you can't relate to. I was in a group with mostly women who were anywhere from like 30 to 50, I want to say. I was 22. So, and they had like really big personalities, which is not a bad thing, but it did feel like a lot of the time I was, in the background a lot. I was seen as someone with like little to no value in a lot of sense because I didn't have the experience that they had. I didn't speak up as much as they did. It was just different. Like I was perceived differently, and depending on who came in the room, it was very obvious that they like viewed me differently. I mean, aside from that, like I didn't get my diagnosis till like maybe a couple months in, but I think I was really glad that it was something that was, I guess, I don't know, confidential in a sense of like no one brought it up in any like session, not the counselors, not anyone. It was just kind of like, okay, it's in your file, but they didn't treat me differently. But when I would go home, obviously I would be like Googling and researching a lot. Which is also the bad thing, right, about partial is that you're not in a safe bubble, so to speak. You can go home and like something bad could happen and trigger you. And, but because I was like fairly isolated, it was a lot easier to just, go to school, my fake school, and then just like come home and then like I wouldn't really do much. I think I would just like eat, sleep, wake up and do it again. It's just, I kept myself in my own bubble. But I guess if you are not that isolated, it could be dangerous in that sense too.
I think for me, it's hard to say very much was helpful in the environment other than that it stopped me from ending my own life. And to that end, it was unbelievably helpful. I am still alive because I was in those environments, and people generally treated me very well, like the staff. But the challenge is when you're in a really severe place like that, a lockdown facility, or afterwards I was in a step down program, which was sort of like a partial inpatient program like Hak Ja was talking about. But both of them were for people who were very severely suicidal and had severe challenges in relationships. So my experiences with my peers was, at best amicable and at worst deeply traumatizing because, we're not being watched 100% of the time. There's a lot of interactions where we were kind of perpetuating our toxic cycles. When I was in a lot of these group settings, it felt a lot like all the worst parts of high school times 100. There are these cliques. There's groups of people who connect, and if you're not one of them, you get ostracized, but in a way worse way than in high school because everybody knows that you have all these issues, so they know how to hurt you the best. That was really, really difficult. The worst part of all of this was after the lockdown, and I was in a partial inpatient, but everyone has all these severe issues. Not everyone survived. There was someone who succeeded in killing themselves while I was there. And then there were two other people who we don't know if it was accidental or on purpose, but there were two other people who successfully ended their own lives as well. So 3 in total. That, oh my gosh, sorry, this is hard to talk about. I think that made it really difficult for me to want to be open or connect or work on skills because I'm constantly being traumatized by the people I'm around ending their own lives. And that was, I think, really, really, really unhelpful. I don't regret having gone to these places. It was really helpful in managing crisis in the sense that, like, especially in the lockdown facility, like we had something called a sharps closet. You weren't allowed to have anything sharp. They took away a lot of things. You had to check them out to use them. Things were very highly regulated. And although that also felt dehumanizing at times, I was grateful that I didn't have to have that kind of control. Somebody else had that control for me. And so now to the aftermath. How did you feel about transitioning back to everyday life after being in the psychiatric ward? What were your biggest concerns? And then if you have it, if this is relevant, what support systems did you find helpful as you reintegrated into your daily routine after your stay in the hospital?
To be honest, I didn't want to leave. And that was the hardest part for me because I started to get used to the routine of going there every day. And since that was supposed to be like, I was graduating college and everything, I still kind of wanted to stay in that like school kind of mentality where I didn't have to think about being an adult yet. So the problem with getting out of partial was that now I have to think about getting a job. And I also, because of all like the distress that I was going through, I never finished my thesis. So I also had to finish my thesis. And so I submitted that like a semester late. But thankfully, like my school was pretty understanding of my situation and gave me some like leeway with that. So I did get an extra semester to like finish that up. I think it was just really helpful to minimize like potential stressors. I really tried hard not to reach back out to anybody I had cut off prior to getting in there. Whether they were really toxic and I was doing something healthy, I don't know. But I thought it was best to just leave things as they were instead of like going back and forth with people and just minimize like the amount of risk to myself because I know that that confrontation would have made things worse. I was in a relationship at the time, so it was kind of helpful in that time to have someone, by my side. Not the healthiest relationship, but in the moment they serve like that role of like being my support and helping me even just finish my thesis, getting me to like go to Panera every week and like go and sit and write. That was really helpful. But I think the hardest thing probably was the idea of like working, because I don't know how it is for the rest of you guys, but I feel like holding a job has been one of the hardest, I guess, symptoms of BPD as like part of an adult. I've just never been able to like have a good experience at any job because of the relationship with coworkers or bosses or things like that. So that was very, very stressful, but it's like now school is over, now the expectations I have to work. But yeah, I think that was definitely like the hardest thing because I didn't want to leave and I didn't want to be an adult yet.
Honestly, what I found difficult about transitioning back, really it felt like you were just dropped back in at the deep end, to be honest. Like, here's a crisis plan or something, but it's here is something that you can do if you start feeling like this again. They could almost guarantee you probably would, because nothing about your health or situation has fundamentally changed as a result of that stay. I appreciate that I'm being very doom and gloom, but my experience of these were very different to many of you guys, which is that like I was going into these very short term bursts, right? So I didn't have like a tailored DBT program through these, or was in like a residential space for an extended period of time. So I think I just want to clarify that to not put people off. But like in my experience, I just felt that I wasn't really even given referrals. It's partly why I felt frustrated about it always being brought up, like, oh, have you ever heard of BPD traits or whatever? It's like, okay, so what do I do about that? There's no point you telling me this, you know? And so I felt like I found the transition almost not really a transition. It was like I was in this place. They physically stopped me from doing something that would have ended my life, but didn't really provide me with any structured tools to address the situation past that. So it felt kind of like I just went back to normal, and things only started to change when COVID happened and everything slowed down dramatically and I was able to like breathe. I sort of found a space to deal with things better. But yeah, like transition wise, I didn't really feel that there was much of one.
You mentioned the like DBT stuff, and it's interesting just because I was in a program where I was in a program where there was like group, but I don't really remember there being any specific modality followed in any particular way. Like for years after, I thought I'd done DBT because they handed out some DBT sheets as a part of group and were like, here's some skills you can try. And I just thought DBT didn't work because I didn't know that there was this whole program. So it's just interesting, that even in places where where there is more of that structure, like I said earlier, I mean, this happened a long time ago. It's been 16 years. So I don't know. I couldn't tell you what those places are like today, but yeah. Anyway, that's a bit of a tangent. Go ahead, Mo.
When I left the hospital, I felt embarrassed and scared because not only was I leaving the hospital, but I was leaving the Navy. So, and the hospital was on base. So they didn't really give me any like referrals or resources because I was going back to my home state. So I kind of felt lost. I knew how to deal with wanting to self-harm, but I didn't know how to deal with my intense emotions or anything like that. So yeah, when I got out of the Navy, when I got discharged from from inpatient care, I still feel like I was in a really bad place because I still didn't really have any direction. And on top of that, I had to come back home and tell everybody what happened. So I struggled with that for a long time, really, is not really talking about that part of my life of being in the Navy and why I left. So, but I don't know. Here I am now telling the world. So yeah, I felt afraid and embarrassed, but I got through it slowly but surely.
I'm trying not. I'm smiling because I knew before I filmed this episode, but I'm realizing, man, it was just one thing after another. I didn't have a transition, because I went through another trauma, the sexual assault, and my behavior got so much worse. I got kicked out of the program that I was in. Basically, the timeline was tried to end my life. Ended up in lockdown facility for about 4 months. Then I was in a step down partial inpatient transition space for about 9 months. And then I got kicked out and then proceeded to spend the next year of my life with the worst people imaginable. So I didn't transition back into normal upstanding life. I went from being part of a treatment program to being part of the dark underside of humanity for a while. So there wasn't really a transition. It took me years to get back out of that hole and actually try to have treatment again. So, yeah, not a path I recommend. There's a lot of darkness in there for sure. What do you wish others understood about the experience of being hospitalized for BPD? How can increased awareness benefit individuals seeking help?
I think an important thing to know or to research is know which places are BPD friendly and which are not, because you really don't want to go inpatient in a place where BPD is going to be highly stigmatized, or you're going to be treated like, what they like actually treat people like in movies, like a crazy person. Literally, that's what they will treat you like because you have BPD. And I wasn't treated that way, but after working in the same place I was treated at later in life, I do feel like it's very likely that they did have that stigmatized view and that they were probably talking badly about me behind my back, with their coworkers. And having a formal diagnosis does put you at risk. It does create complications at times. It might mean that security is called in. It might mean that you're put in restraints, and you do have to have like that certain sort of awareness. And I don't know. I feel like now, like, priority number one is building the skill of like just being able to stay calm no matter how extreme I was feeling, just for the fact of my own safety. Anytime I go into an ER, they have my medical records and they can see BPD, anxiety, all my things. And if I so much as like raise my voice, I start getting security called on me. So I would say that that's the biggest thing I would want to say before going in, is just know that there is a stigma, and you do have to be careful, and you do have to act different sometimes, because just for your own safety. Sometimes it's just necessary, and just understanding that.
Although I agree with Hak Ja, and some of those things, like some of these environments can be very stigmatizing, and professionals in them can be very stigmatizing. I also do know that for me, going, like, there were moments where I needed to go, and it didn't, the fact that somebody was a bit trashy with me or whatever when I was there is an unfortunate consequence. But I still wouldn't be here if I didn't go, So just listen to yourself, I guess, right? Like, listen to what you think your limits are, what you can deal with in that moment, because I think there would have been moments where maybe I wouldn't have been able to deal with that, and was fortunate that I could on those occasions. But ultimately, you being safe and getting what you need is the most important thing. So trying to access that, regardless, I would still advocate for, while having awareness, as Hak Ja said, and doing the best that you can to, like, keep yourself safe, because you can't control what other people do, but you can control what you do.
I wish that more people understood that just because we had really intense symptoms and maybe we had to be hospitalized, we're not bad people. Our behaviors aren't always going to be as challenging as they were when we got admitted, So I wish less people would hold it against us, I guess, We're not bad people. We just had something extreme going on and we needed a lot of help for it.
It's interesting because there's a part of me that wants to say I wish I had known what would happen before I went, but I don't know if that would have changed anything, because like Jay said, I can live through trauma. I can't live through being dead, right? Like, do I wish I hadn't experienced that trauma? Absolutely. But I don't regret having been in a place where other people were responsible for keeping me alive because I couldn't do it myself. And so I think what I wish others would understand is just that, like, these places are not necessarily gonna be comfortable. But sort of like Jay said, listen to yourself, and if it, that it might be necessary. If you are in a position where you can do like Hak Ja said and make sure that they are, BPD friendly, absolutely. Like, had I had that as an option 16 years ago, I would have taken it. At the time, only 2 hospitals in the country were even willing to deal with me. And thankfully, I think things have come a long way in the last 16 years. Not as far as I would like, but I think there are more options now than there was then. If you can, definitely. But sometimes we have to choose having a bad experience as long as it keeps us alive, as depressing as that is. And to wrap this up, what advice would you give to someone with BPD who may be facing a similar situation of needing psychiatric care?
If you're in a program where you are kind of, meeting with different people and getting some sort of educational support in terms of like your mental health, definitely to take that seriously. I, to this day, still have every handout I received while I was in partial. I would take notes if I could. I really tried to implement whatever I was learning, or, even like take a step further and doing my own research on whatever they were teaching me, and just making sure I was continuing that kind of process outside of being in there, and not just when I was in front of a, professional. And I think like a big thing that I would say would be really great if I would need to go back would be that I would definitely try to include more people in on what was happening, just to have like that kind of protective factor in place to, like, I guess, keep me safe, keep myself accountable. It's something I'm really good at now in terms of letting my circle know what's going on in my life, good or bad. and keeping myself accountable in that way. But at that time, I was not good at that. And it was definitely kind of like Mo's experience. Like, it's something you almost feel like ashamed of, like something you want to hide, something you don't want anyone to know. So, but at the end of the day, it's your life. So it's kind of like you don't really have a choice. And there are people in your life who obviously would want to care, try to help. So why not let them? Because you're only doing yourself a disservice by not letting them. You're only distancing yourself away from the people who potentially, love you and care for you and could be like a great help to you. And I think like that was the worst part of like initially being with BPD, is that I did create a great distance between me and everyone in my life, and that made it a lot harder to learn to manage my symptoms, even if I was by myself. So I would definitely say like just really take things seriously, learn as much as you can and try to reach out to people, as uncomfortable as that may be, just to hold yourself accountable to what's going on, or just having someone know like the situation just in case.
Despite the pretty kind of like substantial evidence that there's a lot of stigma within clinical settings, I try really hard to give professionals the benefit of the doubt. I don't really care so much in my own, for me, and maybe this comes from like a very privileged angle, I don't really care what they think. I care what they do. I care what they say to me. I care how they treat me. I don't really care what they think about the validity of the disorder. If they think I'm a nightmare, I could care less. Obviously, I don't want to hear them talking about me in that way, and nobody would like that. But it's pretty rare that happened to me. In fact, I don't think that ever happened explicitly. I try to believe that they have some awareness of their own limitations, where their attitudes to that are concerned, and they're usually still trying to help you get through whatever it is that you need to get through. It doesn't mean that they don't think that you're difficult, but they're still, if they're, look, listen, if you're getting me from A to B, then I think you can think that I'm as difficult as you want. That's whatever. I don't really care, So try to give them the benefit of the doubt in that regard, just for your own sake, to get through that process and to get out of it what you need. And then the second thing would be kind of like, be prepared to be challenged. So like, none of this is going to be easy, right? I don't know, like summarizing BPD treatment or recovery, you're essentially unlearning a lifetime's worth of things that you've learned to protect yourself in the face of circumstances that you should never have had to have been put in front of. That's kind of a simple summary, right? So none of that process is going to be easy. What it looks like for everyone is kind of different. People with BPD get lumped into one big category. Everyone in this room right now is quite different from each other in like our experiences, how we respond to them, our attitudes to things. There are overlaps, but we're all different people. So show yourself some grace, but also be willing to engage with the process as fully as possible. Some of it will be scary, but I think probably living life continually in crisis is scarier.
My advice is kind of simple, really, because we're all in a different state of mind when we go into a hospital. We're there for different reasons. We have different attitudes about it. So I would say just go in there with the expectation and the hopes of healing at least a little part of you, because as others have said, it's not going to be easy, but it's going to be worth it. So just keep that in mind.
You all did such a great job. I don't really have that much to add. The only thing I would just say is that, I think sometimes we can be pretty hard on ourselves as human beings tend to be. And there's a shame about needing help. And I would say just to have some compassion and grace for yourself, that it's okay to need help. It's okay to make use of these services if they're available to you. As has been said, it might be scary, but if it's the thing that keeps you here to live another day, it's worth it. That was definitely an episode with lots of lots of emotions. So if you're having any kind of a reaction to some of the stories, definitely take time, self-soothe, pay attention to how you're feeling in your body, whatever this brings up for you. Thank you everyone so much for watching. We hope that you got a nugget of wisdom to take with you on your journey. Friday, we'll be back to talk about how the psychiatric ward was most effective in helping us manage our crises. On Sunday, we've got a fun brunch episode coming out. We're going to respond to some of the mean comments that we've gotten from people on the internet. So check that out. And then next Wednesday, we'll be back with a brand new episode topic. If you can't wait until then, please consider supporting our top 2 tiers on Patreon. Our BPD buddies and BPD besties get early access a week in advance to extended cuts of our Wednesday episodes. So next week's episode is already available right now on Patreon. You can check it out in the link down below. And we will see you next time.